I was really excited that you're able to make it out here from Colorado. You're a busy guy. You're flying all over the place. Spent some time in D.C., spent some time in Colorado. Where else? I mean, really all over, right? You
stayed in Boston.
Sheesh. Served in the Navy. How many years total?
29.
Retired as a captain. And you're an ace. You're like the Top Gun, the whole 9 yards, sort of Tom Cruise. What planes do you fly?
F4s, F-14s, F-18s.
Yeah. So you had some cross-platform experience. Yeah. Hey, if you warm up to this guy, maybe later on tonight at Duke's, he might regale you with 1 or 2 stories off the records. That kind of fun. So, and then, but that's not the extent of experience. That was as a reservist for a large portion of it, right?
Yeah, 20 years as a reservist.
20 years as a reservist, which means you decided you couldn't handle enough work there. You wanted to do more elsewhere. So what else did you do?
Well, I was a semiconductor designer in the late 80s and put one of the first commercial websites online in the very early 90s. And then got invited to run Sun's Internet Development Organization for Scott McNeely in the mid-90s. It was, I think, probably the best job in Silicon Valley.
Well, I think it's an interesting experience. You got to work with a guy trying to Jack Welch.
I did.
Yeah, so you got to work with him, and what were you doing then?
I was doing mergers and acquisitions as the vice president for Jack Welch, buying and selling technology.
Okay, so again, folks, he's qualified. He knows what he's talking about. All right, he has a lot of experience. He's very trusted. He has the ear of admirals, senior executives, senior leadership, all over the place. When he talks, people listen. So I hope you guys really enjoy him. We're thrilled to have him. Care Team 1 is thrilled to sponsor you. So please give him a hand. Rick Brennan.
So I'm going to do a little bit of background on the genesis of the brief that the slides I'm going to go through. For the last 4 years, I've been working for the Navy, DARPA, and for the Air Force on trying to figure out how to do knowledge management on the battlefield. And it's a little bit of a different environment than we've been talking about today. There's a great deal of worry about security and about overloading the guy in the cockpit or the woman on the ground that's carrying weapons. And having them do the wrong thing, or having somebody get control of our environment and induce them to do the wrong thing. So there's a culture that's built up in the way that we built our weapon systems that's kind of getting in our way right now. And there are a bunch of us that are struggling with how do we take the concepts that we're wrestling with in the regular world with a lot less restrictions on them, and how do we make them work for the battlefield. In the process of working through this problem, we've learned some things that I think apply directly back to broader knowledge management areas. And as I get close to the end of the presentation, I think you'll recognize that the things that we're running into are things that you're running into in your organizations and in the work that you're doing. So I want to start out with one of the areas that's driving us just crazy, and that's that the Department of Defense, especially in the weapons systems area, moves slowly. And the world is not moving slowly right now. So Secretary Gates, one of the best Secretaries of Defense in my lifetime, this guy's bright, he's driving us, I think, in a lot of the right directions, he's asking a lot of the right questions, and he's saying some things that are, seem really reasonable. Boy, we got to look at change, we've got to look at what's going to happen tomorrow, and we've got to prepare for contingencies in the future. Problem is that way of thinking is directly in line with the DoD culture that has us not looking out and designing systems so that we can be nimble enough. If you look at what's going to happen in 5 years, but the cycle time for you to build systems is 10 years long, then you're always going to be behind when the change that you thought was coming in 5 years actually comes in 2. So it's not a new problem. I think I've got a Greek philosopher quoted that nothing endures but change. So the attitude, instead of looking at what we think is going to happen in 5 years, is we're now starting to look more at, we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. We've got to start architecting for change. So we've got to architect systems that have shorter cycle times, systems that change, systems that combine more quickly. Tough problem in the culture of the Department of Defense. We're getting a little help from the real world, though. And the real world's showing up in our face and causing us some real problems. First, conflicts are smaller, and are shorter in duration. So the stuff we planned for back in when I was flying, the Cold War, we don't even think about that right now. I mean, we're pretty much the superpower on the planet right now, which is nice in one way, bad in another. We prepared to fight our way to the top. We've got our entire force structured that way. And now we're at the top, and now all the ankle biters are driving us crazy. And we don't have a force that is structured nimbly enough to be able to take care of that. Economics have really turned the way that we think on its heel. I remember 10 years ago where it was almost a blank check written to the Department of Defense in the congressional budget. We are fighting tooth and nail for every penny right now, and the budget's going to go down, and that's a tough thing for this culture to deal with. So the whole notion of we can do whatever we want if we just decide to do it is really in the rearview mirror. We're looking very hard right now at everything that we do being done economically, for economic reasons, in concert with other nations, other militaries, other agencies, other nation-state governments, authorities. The problem, it shows up in the knowledge management area. Because we designed to do it ourselves, our systems are designed insularly. We have a terrible time moving knowledge, moving information so that we can operate. And financial realities are saying, we can't operate the way that we did before. We can't do things unilaterally. One of the other things that's really hitting us too is that our effects, the things that we do, they show up, in 10 minutes later on Twitter or on Facebook or on the web or, heaven help us, on YouTube. The ability to move that information around and understand what it is we're doing and stay ahead of our ankle-biting competitors who are using YouTube and Facebook and Twitter to run their operations is causing us to have to really rethink the way that we manage knowledge on the battlefield. Literally, the bad guys, in some cases, are knowing about things that happen on the battlefield before we do because they're using the commercial infrastructure. And it's showing up in places like Iraq and Afghanistan right now, where the cell phone traffic and the web traffic goes crazy whenever we engage in an operation. And finally, the way of thinking about what the military does for a living is changing. When I trained, our job was to break things and kill people. That was what we were trained to do. And now we're telling our folks, our men and women out there in uniform, your job's stability. Stability operations is what you're all about. And trying to get your head around how dropping weapons or dropping bombs creates stability is pretty interesting stuff, and it works, but you got to think about it, right? So how does that show up? It's this winning the peace problem that is most difficult for us. This is a new role for the military. It wouldn't be a new role for the Seabees, but in a broad sense, creating stability, maintaining stability with arms so that you can do nation building is something that is tough. And now you start running into information flows that we just never anticipated. Because as you know, we train, we set up the military to go in and win quickly and win decisively, and then get out. We're not getting out. So our knowledge management system is set up for operationally deploying weapons and creating effects. They aren't set up to understand what's socially going on with the insurgency that's happening all around us. And using these tools, using these knowledge management tools to be able to do that and hook our warfighters together, we don't have the infrastructure to do it right now. It's happening, but it's happening slowly, and it's difficult to make it work. We got a real eye-opener with Katrina. Katrina was a major disaster, and the military was asked to come in and help with humanitarian relief. Well, humanitarian relief has always been a mission for the military, but having to do it at a large scale on our own soil was unusual. And we found out that we couldn't move knowledge around that battlefield when it occurred. It was a catastrophic takedown of the communications infrastructure. And we discovered that all our radios and all our communications gear that we have in the Department of Defense didn't exactly line up with fire and rescue and police. And even when we could bridge across and make that work, they were using the web and email, and we were using tactical data links and tactical messaging. So, wow, you know, the Katrina report was not very kind to the way that we had thought about being able to interoperate outside of our traditional boundaries. Kennedy, I think, understood this problem. It took us almost 40 years to start organizationally structuring so that the military could be flexible enough to manage beyond the traditional military means. And I think Kennedy said it well when he said, "You must understand that few important problems of our time have been finally solved by military power alone." That the military conflict that we prepare for, we train so hard for, we spend so much money on, tends to be a centerpiece of something that has big tails on either side. And those big tails on either side are getting larger and more important for us these days. And we have to change the way we think about knowledge, knowledge management, operations to be able to take care of it. In 1986, we tried to solve part of that problem. So the theme here is knowledge needs to flow across boundaries to make an organization be flexible enough so that it can do things that aren't in its pre-planned environment. Right? So in 1996, the Goldwater-Nichols Defense Reorganization Act created commanders in charge that crossed service boundaries, because at that time we had a great deal of difficulty fighting when we had to combine the Navy and the Air Force, or the Air Force and the Army. Still do. But these commanders in charge were designed to start solving that problem. So assets that come out of the Air Force or the Navy would be combined together to be able to fight some sort of a conflict, a wartime operation. Donald Rumsfeld, for all his pluses and minuses, recognized that concept needed to be extended. That we were starting to work fairly well together as a set of services that would contribute assets under one commander on a battlefield. But where we were not doing so well is when we had to combine assets from other militaries. And we were really doing badly if we were combining assets that weren't military assets, which, if you go over and spend some time with CENTCOM, you find out that that's the core of what those guys do. They mix civil assets on the ground, commercial assets on the ground, run it on commercial infrastructure, bring in multinational forces, bring in other agencies, bring in the services, and they've got to take all those resources, mix them together, and use them to get things done. Tough problem. So today we operate under what's called a combatant commander or COCOM structure. That COCOM is responsible for not only multinational military resources, but also commercial and civil and other agency resources coming underneath them. The odd thing is, we haven't changed the way that we move knowledge. So we still move the knowledge within the CIA, or within the FBI, or within the United States Air Force, or the Navy, or within Blackwater. And we have a hell of a time taking those knowledge systems and mixing them together. Part of the problem is cultural. Part of it is systemic. And I'm going to talk about some of the issues in a couple of slides here. But one of the most impressive models I think we've got to work with, and unfortunately it's a very difficult mental transition to make, to go from the model on the left, which is hardware-based and network as a transport mechanism-based. Tactical data links are what these things are, if you're familiar with the military. These are in the military and the Department of Defense, we call the network the actual part that is the Comcast cable in your house, right? That's our network. We don't think of the network today very well as the servers and software and services and the entire soft framework that the commercial world now is focused on for what a network really is. On the right is Sobrowski's model. Admiral Sobrowski coined the term Network Centric Warfare. I wish he had called it Knowledge Centric Warfare, because people that are mired in the model on the left think that we'll solve the problem by simply investing more heavily on the fabric of being able to move information around the battlefield. On the right, what Sobrowski was trying to tell us is that this problem is a knowledge problem. It's a cognitive problem. It's a social problem. Getting firefighters to go out into the field in Iraq and pick up a downed Navy pilot off the carrier is a social construct problem. You can move that information all day long, but if you haven't figured out how those organizations are supposed to work together, you're not going to get that guy to go out there at the right place and do the right thing and pick that guy up. And that's a simple example, right? So if you go read, and you can get it on the web, Sobrowski's Network Centric Warfare treatise, his 10-page document, it's brilliant. We don't do it yet. Not on the battlefield. We do not have anything that looks like that model. Like, we don't understand yet the true power of the knowledge management, social media, software services in our battlefield operations. I think we're going to, but we're struggling with it. And there are some really good reasons why. And I'm going to step through them because I think they're the same reasons that cause commercial entities and other agency entities to struggle with knowledge management. They have to do with culture, business model, organizational structure issues, security policy, which translates to something that the CIO for New York was talking about this morning, which is privacy, information handling policies. We tend to think of them more as security issues in the Department of Defense, but they're all the same. It's, can I give all the information that I have to everybody out there, and if not, how do I control it? And systems inertia. Once we build something, we are loath to get rid of it. We like to hold on to it, and the Department of Defense has got that disease a little bit worse than most organizations do. This combination of barriers is very difficult to overcome, and about 2/3 of my time is spent now with the Air Force, DARPA, and the Navy. The other part, I'm a partner in 2 venture capital firms, so I'm working with leading-edge companies in mostly knowledge management areas. We run into almost exactly the same issues. They're differently flavored, but these same issues show up. The first one we were talking about this morning, and it's this cultural divide, and it's an age divide, right? So I think most of you have heard the term digital native. My teenage sons are digital natives. They don't remember a time when there weren't computers. And it's kind of like the divide between myself and my father. I can't remember a time when there wasn't TV. You know, and obviously my dad remembers when there wasn't TV. But this digital divide is more important for us now culturally than the TV divide. At least I'd argue it is. And I run into it every day with folks that are my age and older. They don't understand that these tools that we're talking about, these technologies we're talking about, are built into the social fabric for the world right now. And literally, the admirals I brief, the generals that I talk to, they think of these things as separate sets of tools that they're going to invest in, and they don't have confidence that they're going to actually do anything. And you'll see it all over the place where people will say, we're too dependent on technology, we don't want to invest in these technologies, we've got to go back to the basics, we've got to go back to communicating directly with the trooper on the ground face to face, and we've got to make sure that they know how to think. And there's some truth to both sides, but the inevitability of using technology to be able to move information and help people make decisions, that's not going away. And we need to work on figuring out how to do that. One of the other ones, and I heard it in the room, I'm not sure if it was the same context that I run into with a lot of admirals and generals, is that this knowledge management stuff, bunk, we've got way too much information flowing to the warfighter already, we're just going to confuse it. And that attitude shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what knowledge management is. Knowledge management is creating data, information, Jerry talks about, and taking it and making it useful to do work with. And useful to do work with means that you have to deal with the human interface in a way that the human beings that you're talking to can actually do work with it. So one of the most fascinating projects I worked on about 15 years ago was one for a company called Smart Money. You can go online and look at this. They're called heat maps. We did it with a university when I was at Sun. And the problem that got presented was one, a security score trading problem. And I don't know if you've ever seen the data flows for the stock market, but enormous amount of changing data, right? You've got thousands of companies, and you've got all this data that's changing all the time because the trades are happening like that, right? So how, looking at these numbers, when we first presented this problem, they were having traders that would have screens, their computer screens on their desk, and they would have these numbers just flowing by. And they had to make decisions based on them. And they said, this doesn't work, all right? Human beings can't deal with a bunch of moving numbers. So we worked together with some folks and we came up with this heat map concept. And what it was it took all this huge data flow, right, going into this little engine, and it converted it to graphical and color display. And really go look at this heat map stuff. Go to Smart Money and look at heat maps. It's really cool. What it does is it says if the company is large market cap, it's a large square on this matrix. Right? If it's a small cap company, small total value of the company, it's small. If the stock is going up, it's brighter green. If it's going down, it's brighter red. If it's not going anywhere, it's black. And what's kind of cool about it is you put this stuff out there and you flow all this data into it, and I can look at it, and you can too, and you can tell like that what the market's doing. Not only can you tell what the market's doing, it's broken into sectors graphically. You can tell what any sector is doing. I can tell you just in a glance, is the market going up? Is it going down? Is it going up a lot? Is there a hot sector? Is there a hot company? And so it's this huge flow of information translated to something that we can really use. So a lot of studies we did at Sun when I was there about human interface and how we perceive things. And it turns out that we're not going to change ourselves. We were hardwired for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years. We're hardwired to our eyes. We're visual. We're visual people. And if you don't believe that, try to watch the TV while scores are going across the bottom while your spouse is talking to you. And see how well that works. What you find out is you can handle 5, 6, 7 visual streams, and you can keep track of them. You can't handle even one visual stream and a translation stream, which is text, right? You can't do both. Try to do it, right? Try to read a streaming set of text across the bottom and keep track of whether, Tom Brady's about ready to get his knee blown out again. Right? Ain't gonna happen. Doesn't happen. Nobody can do it. And then you have an override mechanism, and it's based from back, in prehistoric days. If somebody starts talking to you, that overrides everything. Now you can use that. You can use that on the battlefield, for instance, and you convert as much as you can, the big flows of information that are coming in text and digits. You convert them to visual things. And then you can use the auditory override to say, you get pretty involved in that, and somebody's about ready to kill you. So brake right, so if you're a flyer, that means somebody's behind you and you got to do something with the airplane so you don't get shot, right? So we're starting to work with some of those things, but the culture dies hard. It's tough for us to convince our senior leaders that we even need to invest in studying how this knowledge flows together to the human beings across organizations on the battlefield and we work together. Tough problem. Cultural divide, the digital divide, it's difficult. There's another one, and I know there are a lot of Department of Defense vendors in the room, so this is real. And that's that the Department of Defense is really struggling with the open systems concept. It's struggling with the open systems concept primarily because our business, especially in aviation, is dominated by a very small number of very large companies. It's not in their best interest for them to build open systems. Open systems open up tremendous competition at the second tier level. Second tier guys are really interested in it. The folks in the Department of Defense that understand what open systems do for you in terms of scalability and affordability are interested in it. But we have an interesting dynamic between very large companies, senior leaders, Congress, lobbyists. So we pretty much don't have open systems in our battlefield systems. So much so that we have 2 airplanes right now built by the same company that we spent a hell of a lot of money on. When we put them out in the battlefield, they don't talk to each other. Built by the same firm. They can't even do the simplest collaborative things together, and they're our frontline top, they're in the news every day. So we've got a problem with our open system concepts and business model. We also have a problem inside the Department of Defense in the way that we think. We provide a tremendous amount of power to our program managers. We buy program by program by program. Knowledge management cuts across lines. So buying a system that is going to have an F-18 talk to an E-2, talk to an Aegis cruiser, talk to an Air Force AWACS, talk to a JTAC on the ground, Joint Tactical Air Controller on the ground, talking to an Army brigade is extraordinarily difficult for us to do because we would require all of those programs to loosen up their control of their money and cooperate with each other. And it doesn't happen today. And we've taken the knowledge management concept and the old tactical data links and networks concept and said, we'll create another organization that'll buy our network. But the real problem is in software and in human interfaces, and those software and human interfaces are in our airplanes and our ships and our tanks. So this is an enormous problem. This is an extraordinarily difficult problem to solve in the Department of Defense because changing the flow of money is overseen by Congress. And when you change the flow of money, you change jobs in districts, and any change is pretty tough to make. It's restrictive. I think this is the most interesting of the problems that we face, and it's one that showed up dramatically in the mid-90s as we started introducing knowledge management concepts into the commercial world out of Silicon Valley. And this is the close tie between knowledge management and organizational structure. And what you learn is that organizational structures they aren't good, they aren't bad. You want to pick the right organizational structure for what it is that you're trying to do. So if you're running a manufacturing entity and you're trying to go for repeatable performance over the long term on, say, a product line, you want a hierarchical structure. You don't want a bunch of creative guys on the line deciding that they're going to turn the bolts left, not right today. Right? You want a lot of control, and you want repeatability, and you want to get high quality and performance out. You also want that type of a structure if you're going to ask a bunch of Marines to take a hill. You don't want to group hug ahead of time and have these guys decide whether they really think it's a good idea to go up the hill or whether they're going to do something creative instead. You want the Marines to go up the freaking hill and take the machine guns, right? So the hierarchical structures have their purpose, and that purpose is important to understand. It's important to match what it is that you're doing. Now, hierarchical structures from the knowledge management context, they create vertical structures for knowledge. Knowledge moves up and down because the control moves up and down. And there isn't a lot of sharing in hierarchical organization silos. Right? You see it in almost every strongly hierarchical organization. And you'll hear concepts like, that's not my swim lane. When you hear that's not my swim lane, you know you're in a strongly vertically oriented hierarchical organization. Right? I don't want to know about that. I don't want the knowledge to flow sideways. So good stuff. You can create a knowledge management solution for a strong hierarchical organization, but you better pay attention to this. If your world is changing, these organizations stink at change. They can't handle change. They're structured for repeatable long-term performance, not for change. So what if you've got a world that's changing really rapidly? Well, 1992 introduced an enormous amount of change, because that's when Mark Andreessen and NCSM Mosaic came out, HTML from Tim Berners-Lee. If any, nobody in this room, I think, was asleep at the switch when all that was taking place, but our world's a hell of a lot different than it was then. And you saw organizations having to respond to that accelerated rate of change. And in the high-tech world, that showed up in flattening of organizations, an intense focus on cycle time, compression of cycle time. And interestingly enough, somebody was commenting earlier about, I wouldn't take I think it was like a Microsoft piece of software and put it on a fighter because I would have safety and security problems with it. Yeah, there's a reason for that, right? Because in this world that most of the software you see is built for, that software cycles in less than 90-day cycle times. In 1992, the cycle time in the software industry was there. It was 4 years, right? 4 years major release. Today, 90 days, we do a major change in a piece of software and deploy it globally to hundreds of millions of people. So, yeah, one of the weaknesses of this type of an organization is really lousy, repeatable performance because they don't care. They're going to fix the problem so fast, they're going to move on, change is value. And the knowledge management structures that you have are horizontal. You never hear somebody say, it's not my swim lane. You have people say, I want to know what that other, well, let me collaborate with those guys. Let me work with these. Let me team with these guys. Hey, how do we team together to get this done? Those are flat organizations. Those are organizations that look like this. What's really interesting is if you look at the rate of change that's going on in the United States military, especially in what we're being forced to do, we need to be moving to, in many, many areas, especially in the battlefield, flatter organizations. So a little factoid for you. When I flew, years and years ago, well over 90% of our missions for airplanes were pre-planned, the day before at least, right? So we'd go, we'd have the flight plan, we'd climb on our airplane, we'd go out and we'd fly that mission, even in wartime. Today, well over 85% of our missions are what are called ad hoc missions. We launch that airplane into the air, and we have no idea what that airplane's going to end up doing. We get it in the air and we task it. Why? Because the biggest determination on speed to an effect of an airplane is transiting that airplane to where it's going to provide that effect. And if you have to start with the airplane on the ground, you've got a real problem with time to get that effect. So what we do is we get those airplanes up in the air, we guess about what they ought to have on them in terms of sensors or weapons, and we are starting to get much, much better at predictively guessing what's likely to happen so that we can instantly task those airplanes and go do what we need to do. Well, if you're going to adapt to change like that, you need the ability to have knowledge management that flows rapidly sideways. And you need to have the ability, organizationally, to be able to task those guys horizontally. You need to be able to hook together Air Force airplanes and Navy airplanes and Marines on the ground and Army guys in tanks. And you need to be able to do it at a moment's notice. And our systems are set up this. So it's a challenge for us. It's also a challenge for a lot of DoD vendors. It's also a challenge for a lot of manufacturing sector folks, because they face a world that's changing much, much more rapidly. This is maybe the toughest problem we have. And it's one of the least understood, especially at the high levels. In fact, it's poorly understood all the way through our structures. And it's poorly understood commercially. This is a problem that we run into in the banking industry. It's a problem we run into in any industry that depends on intellectual property and securing intellectual property. And that's, how do you build a knowledge management system that is smart enough when you're building composite knowledge products where you've got information from multiple sources, put them together and gave them to somebody. How do you know whether you can release that composite product? In fact, how do you take knowledge from multiple sources and then produce an environment where you can combine it in? Because once you combine it, it's now different. And they have different value. So example out of my world is if you take a picture that's taken by an F-22, highly classified airplane. If you just take the picture, it might be unclassified, just the picture. You associate the fact that it was taken by an F-22 with it, it's now classified. You associate that it's taken by an F-22 and it was in this location over Iran, it could be very highly classified. We don't know how to deal with that. What we do instead is we say, you know what? You're going to fly back and land. We're going to give it to an analyst and they're going to think about it. You laugh. That is how we handle it. Right? Well, combine that with the fact that we are dealing with an enemy that has windows in their operations that we have to hit that are 15 minutes long. Right? These guys might be exposed. We might be going after somebody that we only know where they are for 10 or 15 minutes. And just doesn't, you do the math, doesn't work very well. They have to take the airplane, bring it all the way back home, land it, get the guys out of the airplane, they run in with the data capture device, they plug it into the network, they send it back to someplace real close to DC, and and those guys munge on it. I mean, by the time you get back and make the decision, the bad guys are, they're drinking beer, they're gone. So how do you build systems that handle multiple levels of security without having to have an analyst look at everything? Because we're dealing in a high rate of change, a high operational need to be able to succeed, and our cycle times for operations are just crunching down. Our op tempos are going way up. Tough problem. I got to tell you, we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to do it yet. This one drives me crazy. This one has been mastered by the commercial world, and we are just mired in it in the Department of Defense. This is what happened arguably around 1992 in terms of Moore's law's effect on practical rates of change for hardware and software. This happens to be a curve for millions of calculations per second for $1,000, but there are almost identical curves for storage, memory, software. So capability curves are exponential curves right now. We live in exponential times. Nobody designs a commercial product right now that isn't designed for tech refresh and isn't designed for tech refresh on a shortening cycle. We design our military systems not to do that. My iPhone that's sitting right there has more computing power than most of our airplanes do. Scary, yeah. So how do you run advanced knowledge management systems on platforms that it costs you millions of dollars to go in and just put a new processor into? Because it does. Well, I'll talk about how you solve that problem, but this is biting us bad right now. Unfortunately, you can't read that other arrow, but most, and I'd say it's even stronger than most, almost all Department of Defense systems are designed, tactical systems are designed as if the world was back where the rate of change for processing capability and software capability is flat. And it is going to hurt on us. And it's going to get worse. So if you can get past Kurzweil's religious thoughts, he's probably the best in the world, Ray Kurzweil, in gathering all this data. And then he makes some pretty interesting claims about where it's going to take us as a society. But there's no corner of the world that's free from this effect, and we have to start designing it. So what do we do about this stuff? And this is one of the things that that I do. I help work through some of these problems. But first, we're not getting away from knowledge management as the core of network-centric warfare, as the core of the way that we're going to operate. I don't care which generals and admirals want to roll the clock back, it isn't going to happen. The effects of technology on the battlefield are here to stay, and they're going to get more and more insidious. I work in the Navy unmanned combat air systems, 5th going to 6th generation unmanned platforms. We're going to be unmanned platforms in the air in the next decade, dominated by unmanned platforms in the air. Technology is going to be critical, knowledge management is going to be critical. We're going to have to get our hands around this. So how do we do it? First, we got to fix this cultural problem. We got to close that digital divide, and that means we got to take the time to educate our leaders. It's tough because the leaders don't want to be educated. They want to do the decision on what do I buy tomorrow. They don't want to understand the touchy-feely stuff about organizational structure versus knowledge management versus technology curves, and they don't want to make their heads hurt on thinking about that stuff because that's not what they were trying to do. They were trying to make a tactical decision effectively right now. Tough problem, but we've got to break through it. Second is we need to understand the huge barrier that our business model has, and we need to find creative ways to start building open systems into the Department of Defense. And unfortunately right now, open systems has been relegated to a corner similar to total quality management and Six Sigma, where our leaders think that it's a cute thing for some folks to go play with, but it's not a core business issue for us. And it is a core business issue for us. Third is we're doing, and actually this is happening, organizational structure. We need to take seriously this COCOM structure. We need to stop thinking Navy, Air Force in operations, and we need to think COCOM. If we design to it, operate that way, and this is happening. But it's still, boy, the cultures, I mean, I'm Navy blue for 30 years. It's tough. It's tough to stop, cheering for the Naval Academy and the Army Navy game. It's a tough problem for us little guys. Multi-level security is a real issue. If we don't solve that problem, we will not succeed on the battlefield with knowledge management. Most people don't even understand it. We've got to start dumping some money into that. And finally, we really have to, and this is where we have to work with our vendors strongly, we have to start designing our tactical platforms for tech refresh. And we have to start squashing the arguments that say that makes them unstable because it doesn't. It's proven not to. So right now, we're being sold by some of the companies represented in this room that You have to lock everything down, and then you have to pay us a fortune if you want to upgrade it. And I know that these companies make a lot of money out of it, but it's killing us. And a lot of companies are turning the corner because it's getting so unaffordable that we're literally zeroing the business out. Business opportunities are starting to not make it past Congress, the President's budget. Got to fix that. And the issues aren't unique to the Department of Defense. So a lot of things that I'm talking about, I see, especially the cultural issues, the organizational structure issues, the flow of information. Even though we say that we've got knowledge management and transparency going on, boy, tough problem. We haven't solved that, especially in organizations that are highly competitive. They don't even trust each other inside of the company. And getting past that cultural issue where you can share knowledge is a tough problem. And you notice, even though most of my job has been engineering based, I didn't talk a lot about engineering. All the technologies to do this, we already have. These problems aren't. Questions? I think that was me. Yes, yes, ma'am.
The culture, is that being addressed at the academies? The newest graduates?
No, they cheer just as loud for
My cousin was there.
Oh, that's too bad. Trying to get an Air Force guy to land on an aircraft carrier, it's a real eye-opener for me. No, I'm sorry, I'm making light of your cultural academy. Can you, I'm not trying to understand the question.
Okay, you've got the future leaders. You said the senior leaders. There are some people that are just going to die, and that's the way it is, and they'll pass on. But you've got these new people coming. You've got the millennials who are graduating from the academy. So is it being addressed with that one?
Yeah, but not the way that I think you're thinking about it. So one of the things I was lucky enough to do was go and give a talk at the academy about this issue. And the students in the room, the plebes in the room, they looked back and they said, duh. Right? These folks are digital natives. They get it. The problem is they walk into an organization that's highly hierarchical as ensigns or right. Their voices are not paid attention to right now. Because the gap is so great between them and the admirals and the generals that it doesn't bubble up. It's a matter of time, though. So I think what's happening is we're starting to get a couple of folks break into those flag ranks that actually use, text messaging, and they're my age, so right. I mean, it's funny. A lot of my the folks that I went to flight school with are now showing up at the Pentagon as admirals. They have kids, and it's kids that are pulling us through, right? They have kids like mine. I've got 3 teenage sons. Wow, if you don't get the technology impact on society, and you have 3 teenage sons, you must be living on the moon or something, right? So a lot of these folks are now, we're getting an age where we've got some of our senior leaders that have teenage kids, and the teenage kids are beating up their parents who are admirals and saying, why don't you get it? The other thing was we're getting feedback from the guys going through flight school and saying, I thought I was getting into the most sophisticated machines in the world, and this looks like I'm playing Pong. What? What gives, right? Some really fascinating people that I get to run into that are helping to change this. There's two guys out of Silicon Valley. I'll tell you 2 really quick stories. One is a guy named Gilman Louis. Gilman, he started In-Q-Tel. Anybody know what In-Q-Tel is? In-Q-Tel is an experiment by the CIA to create breakthroughs by taking some of the CIA money and giving it to Gilman to run a venture capital firm with CIA money. Gilman was the guy who created a laptop-based flight simulator for the Air Force. I think it was around 15 years ago. Nate, you might have been, we were talking about dinner the other day. And this is encouraging. He created this thing on a very small $5 million contract. Gave it, I think it was an F-16 flight simulator. Falcon was the name of it. These guys played with it. They loved it, right? These guys just absolutely loved it. There was a large vendor, I won't name the name, came in and said, you can't have this toy be the training vehicle for the frontline fighters, we're going to have to take this intellectual property and turn it into something big on stilts and make it work. 10 years later, they still hadn't gotten it done. All that time, Gilman had been smart enough to buy back the intellectual property for his simulator, turn it into a game. It was the most popular game, video game out there for, I think, 6-7 years. And all the time, it was still being used in the Air Force to train in the squadrons, outside the system. And all the time, all the young guys are climbing into the airplane, they're sending Gilman letters saying, tweak this, change this, add this upgrade, because we've made this change to the airplane. So this, and the Air Force pays nothing, right? It's all being funded by the game. The game is the most accurate simulator on the planet. It's years ahead of the simulation environments. So the flattening, the need for being able to do things out of the box, our younger generation is we got to pay attention. They're going to be the ones to walk through. Gilman Williams, believe now, is one of the most successful venture capitalists on the planet. He's left the CIA because the CIA started putting rules around Intel. Intel was incredibly successful. Go read the story behind it. It was incredible. Now it's bureaucratic. So, is it changing? Yeah. Do the young guys have it? Yeah. Is it rippling through? Yeah. Yes, sir.
I really enjoyed it, Rick. And just for additional information, I'll talk a little about this tomorrow, but in DOD and the Pentagon, they have a command and control research program, and Dave Alberts and Dick Hayes have been pushing this edge, power to the edge, the network-centric, warfare, making the kinds of things you're preaching in terms of what needs to be done. And I know the Naval Postgraduate School has a Center for Edge Power, edge organization. So, so there is, I don't know how much traction they're getting, but at least there are, some groups that are trying to push this at the higher levels.
Right. Absolutely. So the theory is being pushed by the groups that you're talking about. You have to turn around and go look at reality, right? Reality is go look in our airplanes, and you can't change the software because they're proprietary closed systems. You can change it, but the dollar amounts to change it start, change a line of code for $1 million because of the way it's built. So the theory is there. There are some folks that are working on power tactical edge, right? Tactical edge type techniques, but it's not showing up yet in our airplane. We've got a couple of experimental programs that are gaining some traction, but oddly enough, they're getting opposed by the Office of Secretary of Defense. It's a digital divide. They don't understand. They think that these new things are going to cost us more money because that's the curve the DoD's been on, right? And the next technology costs us more and takes longer to get. And when in the commercial world, the next technology costs us less and it jumps faster. And we're getting a split that's dramatic. Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, along those same lines, do you see places where the champions for this will be coming from? Right now, you've got people looking at failures of the recent past of acquisition reform, and so people move to the warm comfort of rigid standards, and this will work, and that's the way we got to do it because it worked before 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, it's a different problem, or where you're talking about where we need to go has to kind of overcome that recent memory. And do you see where some of the champions might come from who can bridge that?
I think they're in our younger ranks. The other thing that's interesting, and my thinking on the problem that you're talking about, and that's that if you look at the DoD 5000, which is our Bible for how we buy things, it's become more rigid over time. Right? It's taken longer over time. 10 years ago, it took us an average of 10 years to go from idea to fulfillment. Today it takes 12. While the commercial world has gone from years to days, right? Several years ago, I thought, well, how do we solve that problem? We're going to have to attack the process itself. The process is too hard to change. I think that one of the things a bunch of us are doing inside the Pentagon is saying, screw the process. Let's use the process. Let's write different requirements in the process. So instead of writing a hard requirement for the performance of a system, let's write a requirement for a system that can be rapidly upgraded. Let's provide a requirement that says the cycle time for tech refresh on this tactical system is now X number of months. Huge pushback on that. Yes?
Do you see some of the work that the Navy's doing around CANES and the things that CANES is trying to do for the future, both from the DoD perspective and from a government defense contractor perspective, starting to move this direction,
Yeah.
albeit at a very slow pace with lots of...
What a great question. For those of you who don't know what CANES is the Navy's version of what's called a common operating environment. So if you want to attack the problem that every one of the places that you want knowledge management to occur has a proprietary hardware and software place, right? And that means that if you want to go across 10 platforms with a solution, you got to provide 10 solutions, right? 10 different engineering solutions. One of the ways to handle that is to create what's called a common operating environment. So everybody around this room has a common operating environment. Your laptops, whether you know it or not, are designed on an architecture inside where I, as a software developer, don't really care what the vendor of your laptop is in most cases. There are different ways to create those abstraction layers that allow you to write software that runs across multiple hardware environments. The Navy's looking at one way for maritime environments called CANES. Powerful concept, struggling with it, right? We're not anywhere near there. We've now, this year, and I was one who introduced it, adopted that same concept for airplanes. And the Air Force, under contract with the Air Force, is giving it a name. It's called the Universal Networking Interface, UNI. So that set of concepts is critical for us to be able to break some of the problems that are up here. Our vendors are pushing back. They don't want to see this. The top vendors don't want to see it because it makes it so that almost anybody can write software for the knowledge management functions on the battlefield. And that has billion-dollar implications. Yes?
I half agree, half disagree.
Well, the other half is wrong. So.
I mean, when we try and use commercial products.
I never said commercial products.
Well, Vista and XP. Vista so.
We're not going to use Vista.
What?
Not in tactical applications. It's unstable.
Well, now. But certain programs are on Vista. F-8s and things like that.
There's not a single weapons release program that is, weapons release, something that is in the flow to release a weapon. So safety of flight, weapons release, things that have to be incredibly stable, those are Unix or real-time operating system based. So you have to be smart about how you engineer these things, right? Stability is really important to us.
We have now put essentially commercial software XP, not in the real-time control systems. I mean, we're smart enough not to do that. But we've used XP and we're looking at Vista, or did look at Vista. But it's so cruddy that my Vista at home on my laptop, I have to restart it twice.
So none of the projects I'm working on have that problem.
To go along with this, I've been listening to this. Go along with this, and not in defense of the defense industry itself and the cost, but in a commercial world or in a business world, the turnover in technology is so fast because the consequences are less. But in the defense, in a flight system, we have built in so many checks and balances, safeguards, and it goes on so slow because one bad line of code can crash a multi-million-dollar airplane.
Yeah, so clearly understand what I'm talking about right now. Yes, absolutely. Right. So we got to go back to the CANES common operating environment concept. And what that says is create a common operating environment for the type of software that's collaborative. Knowledge management software. This is not flight control software. This is the ability to move knowledge across the battlefield and make decision support software primarily, right? Make decisions, move sensor information. In that case, the necessity for being able to move with the curve is critical. Flight control software, we reached the point in computing power necessary to reach the cycles for fly-by-wire control well over 15 years ago. The processor was playing fast. We don't have to go onto an unstable curve for flight control software. Most of the weapons control stuff is the same way. These are robotic systems. the real-time operating systems. Those we're segregating right now. So the common operating environment concepts say build an interface to those, keep them stable. You don't have to upgrade the processor every time new one comes out in those systems. You have plenty of power to do that. Knowledge management systems, they react incredibly powerfully to an upgraded processor. Right? So we already know right now that we want to go from the types of interfaces we have today, which are primarily manual interfaces. We're interfacing with the software by moving some sort of controls with our hands. That really is crappy under 6.5 Gs or 8 Gs or 12 Gs, right, for manned platforms. And doesn't work at all for unmanned platforms. So we're going to be moving to, for instance, voice interfaces. Well, voice interfaces consume an enormous amount of computing power to get them right. Have an accent. Yeah. Well, it turns out accents are, I know a fair amount about that stuff, but accents are less problematic if you design for them. It's understanding language is tough. Understanding language is what consumes, if you construct a complex sentence, it's incredibly difficult for the machine to understand that today. But we can plot the curves for the processors, and we can plot what the guys who are writing the voice software need. And they intersect with different capabilities, and we know where those capabilities are in the future. Those curves are predictably fairly accurate. So you're going to see voice interfaces show up in your cars. You're going to see them show up for your phones. We already are sort of, they're pretty crappy right now. They're going to show up everywhere because we were never really meant to communicate with our neighbors. If we were, we'd walk out to each other. So your points are well taken. You have to really understand the engineering behind the knowledge management problem, right? If you don't need the processing power, then you don't put up with the instability. If you do need the processing power, you put up with some instability, but you design it out, right? So we're getting very good, we being the engineers, are getting very good at progressive systems that don't break anymore on the hardware side. Pretty much don't have systems crash because you put a new processor these days. But where we haven't gotten really good at it because we've compressed the cycle times and we've made that so valuable is software. We have software that crashes all the time. You can write software that doesn't crash them. And the early CMM process, I think it's CMC process now, is the way to evaluate software groups to see if you can write the kind of software that doesn't do what Microsoft would never pass in CMM. Yes, sir, I think you were asking.
Going back
I'm not a Microsoft.
Well, one of your first comments.
Yes, that's all.
You were talking about the current generation of leaders saying we get this information over to the
Right. I hear that all the time.
One of my colleagues had a great comment the other day. He said, you oftentimes hear people say, I have an information overload. You never hear them say, I have a knowledge overload.
Great point. Yeah. And I think that is the point.
I think that is the point you made very well.
Yeah. I've got 2,500 hours flying, and I can tell you I could always use more knowledge.
I don't necessarily need more information.
That's right. I'd really like to know what that other guy's about to do. Right? So the more sophisticated battlefield systems that we're looking at right now are predictive. We look at data streams and we say, what's likely to happen? Pretty neat stuff. And God, I wish I was climbing that in the cockpit now with that kind of advantage. But, we're having a tough time getting them out of labs and into the airplanes because of this kind of stuff in the airplanes. Yes?
One of the points that brought up repeatedly during the presentation you gave was kind of this generational gap that exists. You said, many of the admirals are looking to their teenage children to be able to say, hey, what is this Twitter stuff, and how do I use this Facebook page?
Actually, I think it's the other way. I think the teenage children are beating up the admirals, but
implicit with that point too, and you also mentioned the point about the first lieutenants and the ensigns coming in and having a lot of desire to make some of these changes you have up here on the slide. Yeah. So it seems like as you've got a young group of people coming into this that have a desire for change, then you have the admirals up at the top that kind of see the change, but maybe not as well.
Yeah.
And I think what to the detriment of the organizations, that middle management part gets overlooked a lot. How have you seen middle management, how to try to flesh out a lot of the stuff that you have up there?
Yeah.
But I think implicitly, even just before, we're talking about the young people and the more seasoned people, but the middle management's there. You can either look at them as a barrier or you can look at them as a support mechanism to be able to do some of this stuff. So I don't know how the Department of Defense has.
Yeah, so you don't work in the Department of Defense, so one of the challenges in a highly verticalized, hierarchical organization is that the culture doesn't say, you know what, I'm going to tell the admiral what I want. Right? Usually when somebody says that, I got a great idea, I want to tell the admiral, the folks who have been around a while say, you know, let's wait, the admiral will tell us what he wants done. And not true anymore, but it's pretty prevalent. Right? So you got mid-management that is really trying to satisfy upper management, and that's what they spend most of their time doing. It's not a culture that promotes Silicon Valley type innovation. So real interesting thing I did last year. 2 minutes left, I think, right now.
You're good. We got 30 minutes.
Yeah, I took.
Question and answer time just started.
Yeah, I took 25 mid-management DoD folks to Silicon Valley, and I had Gilman talk. I had Jim Sporer, head of IBM Almaden Research, where maybe you don't know, the largest number of patents in the world flows through any single facility flows through that facility. It has been for the last 20 years. I think they missed it twice. Had Kirk Carlson, head of the SRI. If you ever want to look at innovation, go look at SRI. Really interesting place. Stanford Research. Bunch of startup company guys talk. And they were out there trying to understand why the mid-management culture in the Department of Defense wasn't able to grasp the kind of innovation that these folks had promoted in Silicon Valley. And what it really came down to was this hierarchical culture versus flat culture. And that the flat culture in the Silicon Valley type organizations also had another component layered on top of it, and that's that they had been taught that risk was good. And those of you working in the Department of Defense know that risk is to be stamped out at all costs, right? So much so that we will not recognize a failure. We'll keep it around and not recognize the failure, right, until it has to be recognized. So in the department, in Silicon Valley, what these guys said, Kirk Carlson and Jim Sporer and Gilman and Mike Jones, who's Google's Google Earth CTO, really interesting guy, they all said the same thing. They said, what the culture, if you want to be able to compete with us, if you want to be able to start innovating like us, you have to embrace risk as a good thing. It means you have to take a lot of small, cheap risks fast. And when you get successes, you need to overinvest in the successes. In the Department of Defense, we do exactly the opposite. We take very, very few risks, and we take them big. JTRS, the Joint Tactical Radio System, huge risk, right? $8 billion risk. By all accounts, it's big. Right? TSAT, multi-billion-dollar risk. Just got to FCS, multi-billion-dollar risk. Yeah, jury's out, right? If you look at the way that these things are built in places like Silicon Valley, the venture capital community makes risks in the $5 to $10 million range. It makes tons of them, right? It takes tons of those bets. Now, a lot of them succeed, but most of them fail. And they're okay with that, right? So if you're in a startup company that fails, and that's on your resume, and you go apply for another startup company job, that's not a negative. You had experience in something that failed, that's not bad. If you have 3 projects that you were involved in that failed in DoD and it's on your resume, ow. Right? There's a cultural problem even at the mid. Is that it?
So with all these culture or behavior challenges, are you doing anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some folks that went out to Silicon Valley, some of these 25 folks, and came back and we got together and we started thinking about this problem. We had a bunch of folks that have been involved in the process of doing the 5000 stuff, thinking about this problem. And we're starting to, at the mid-level, with a couple of admirals that are, and generals that are getting it, that are behind us, we're starting to say, look, we can work within the process and the culture that we have to create successes, and then we can take those successes, if they're designed for scale, and scale them, I think. So a great example of that is a guy named Glenn Colby down at Pax River for the Navy Unmanned Combat Air Systems program. Combat Air Systems is a stealth unmanned fighter weapons carrying airplane. Will be a fifth to sixth generation airplane. Desperately needs this kind of software and environment on it. He's willing to take those chances. So small amounts of money. He's going out to Silicon Valley with me next week after next, going to Boston next week. And we're talking to small entrepreneurial folks and looking at really bleeding edge solutions, and then we're going to bring them back in, build them small, demonstrate them, measure the performance. At the same time, we're trying to bring economics into the case for this open architecture side of things. So we're trying to educate the open architecture community on the realistic economies of writing one software application for 10 programs versus 10 software applications for 10 programs. And the software applications, because it's in a proprietary environment, are in the $100 million per software application range. So go do the math. It turns into real money real fast. And then try to drive the economics back through the system. So we've got the Gartner Group doing a study for us. I'm actually trying to find some universities to do economic studies on transition from proprietary environments to open environments and what the economics are based on real Department of Defense programs and real money. Well, you know what's interesting about that? I think if you're in a Department of Defense company and you look at this, two things you ought to conclude. One is it's inevitable. We cannot continue the way we're going because we're starting to get to the point where you guys aren't getting in business because we're losing at the budget table. It's getting zero at the budget table. The second thing is if you transition and you're aggressive about building good products, you actually get a larger market to build software products in an open world. It's a more competitive world. You have to be better to win those, but the market sizes are larger. So I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen, and the companies that get on board and promote it, all the second-tier guys are like, boy, they love this idea. We get one or two first-tier guys starting to really adopt it, and I think that the transition happens.
So the challenge we're having is we have a similar situation, and we try to convince our executives either to change the way we think.
And whose executives are these?
Our top leadership.
I know, you're talking about a specific company?
Yeah, like our very
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So the first step of convincing our executives is one thing, and I think it's relatively easier. They get it.
Okay.
But then try to convince them to practice or execute. That's another huge challenge.
Right. Talk is cheap. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough problem. The other thing is, we're fighting the same old thing of, nobody lost it. When I was at Sun and we were fighting IBM, IBM had a proprietary hold on the commercial world of its mainframes, in the late 80s, into the early 90s. And the IBM guys would walk around, as those of us, and this is when open systems, was the fight was being taken, we were wrestling each other to the ground at this point. And the IBM guys would go around and tell all of their customers, well, nobody ever lost their job by hitting IBM. Right? And that's the problem you're talking about, right? So if it's been done like this, done like this, done like this, and then I say, you know what? You get it, right? And you say, yeah. Well, then make a decision. Now you're a unicorn. Now you're standing out by yourself. You got to have the homies. You don't have a lot of them.
Well, ironically, IBM has done a lot of
It is one of the biggest proponents of open systems, right? Well, because the mainframe market collapsed, right? The open systems effort succeeded, the economics, and we're trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to prove that the economics are compelling.
Well, being in one of these aerospace defense companies, and I'm fairly certain that my group is not going to be representative of the company, so I'm getting fired.
Yeah.
But
it's a good thing this isn't on tape.
yeah, I actually agree with you in that it's better both for the DID, but I think ultimately it's better for our company as well.
I do too.
To start moving into this model.
Yeah.
And I would like to see, well, from my perspective, if DOD is the one with the money, we're trying to to you. It seems to me like you have more power in this relationship to influence what.
So I'm not sure we really want to get into this here, but there's another factor. And I'll use a different example to demonstrate it. I think most of you are very familiar with the fight in Congress over the F-22, right? And the Department of Defense, Secretary Gates, is trying to limit the run of that airplane. The senators and congressmen who have Lockheed Martin jobs in their districts are coming to the table and saying, oh my God, we can't stop this because we'll lose jobs. But nobody's coming to the table and saying, those are really inefficient jobs. I mean, we got a hell of a lot of money generating very, very few jobs. If we took that same amount of money and did almost anything else, we would generate a lot more jobs. What they're really saying is, I'm going to lose jobs in my district, right? Well, so anytime we try to make any of these changes with huge scale implications, we get called to the hill. We explain why we are not protecting the Department of Defense's industry. And it's a tough question to answer when the congressional staff only wants to hear what the impact is on the jobs in their district. Difficult problem. So it's not as simple as purely saying the economics work and we should transition the model, and right, because there are more players involved than just the warfighter, the guy that climbs in the cockpit, the middle manager that's a program manager, and even the admiral, right? You know, so I think that statement could very well be true, but it's unrealistic. So what I think we have to do is we have to work within the model that we have. And we have to prove to people the overwhelming economics, and we have to get some folks understanding that the transition could be beneficial to even the biggest companies.
You really need somebody in aerospace to potentially do what I did.
Yes. And I think that it's going to happen because the economics are going to force it to happen. I would argue that you're right. Because IBM didn't collapse under the weight of this. Because the first guy to step out is risky. Right? So I think you're right. We have a question over here.
I have one question. We've been talking about culture, that dynamic, and
yeah.
we talked about earlier about the organization structure. If you look at the organization structure and it's built to produce a certain outcome,
yep.
If you don't change that fundamental structure, how would you expect to significantly impact?
You're right? That's why I put it in the slide. So doing the same thing tomorrow as you did today, expecting a different outcome, right? Everybody knows Markham and Sandy, right? That's a corollary to it, right? If you can wish your organization to behave differently, but if you don't restructure it, it will not behave differently. It'll behave as it did yesterday. In working in General Electric, I remember one of the things that Jack Welch told us, and there's an extension to knowledge management. He said, don't look at the org chart when we're looking at a company to evaluate their acquisition. Look at the flow of money. The flow of money will tell you how the organization is actually structured. The flow of resources tell you where the power is and how the company reacts. And he said, I'll guarantee you almost every case, the org chart's not going to represent the flow of money, and the org chart's not going to represent the way the company actually behaves. And if you want to change the way the company behaves, change the flow of money. That was before, I think, Jack and the rest of us really understood knowledge management. I think you could also replace money with knowledge. Look at the way knowledge flows in an organization and you'll understand how it behaves. Want to change the way it behaves, change the flow of knowledge. If you don't know what's going on, you're not going to be very influential. So I think you're right, and you can't change the flow of knowledge without, you can pretend to not change the org chart, but by changing the flow of money or changing the flow of knowledge, you're going to change the effective org chart. You're going to change the way the company works. That's what we're talking about. Right? So, frustration for me is when people focus in just on the technology of knowledge management and think that they're doing something. They're wrong. Right? And you can go off and look failure after failure after failure. They have to address the culture issues. They have to address the power issues, and they have to address them in concert with the flow of knowledge. And if you do that, you'll see dramatic change. You'll see, if you know what you're doing, you can really screw things up too, right? I mean, it's powerful stuff to play with, but you can see dramatic performance changes as well. Yes, ma'am.
Along the same lines, when we're talking about DARPA and our current understanding that one of our bomber cranes, the cost of it would be enough to house, clothe, educate, and feed the entire population of the world for a year.
Well, I'm not sure that's quite true, but it's
it's close.
it's pretty expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, in terms of knowledge change and ethics, if at the level of DARPA, if there is anything, these incredible technologies that we're developing and looking at, is there anything actually on the table to look at changing the stage of the question for conflict management outside of the kind of military engagement that we have toward a more peaceful and mediation-oriented structure of dealing with the world's conflicts?
Wow. You crossed about 50 concepts there. First, I think you've got a correlation between DARPA and our actual acquisition programs that has a separation to it. So it's not DARPA that generates these, it's our acquisition system within the services that generate things like the airplane you're talking about. DARPA is actually an incredibly, potentially powerful organization for us because they actually think about the types of things that you're talking about, right? Unfortunately, the transition of ideas from DARPA to production in the Department of Defense is not very efficient. And I can quote you the numbers, but I don't know them exactly. But it's sub 10% of the projects that go on at DARPA and our other science and technology efforts that actually transition to real things that show up on the field. So are they looking at the types of concepts that you're talking about? Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff going on. You can actually get an amazing amount of information about DARPA by going on the web and looking under DARPA programs. And you'll be frankly surprised at what DARPA is doing, the breadth of stuff that DARPA is doing. One of my good friends just took on a project to figure out how to build a flying car. Doesn't sound very military. It does have military applications. The flying Humvee is actually kind of attractive, but they're actually working on a flying car concept, right? Yeah, right. Although there's some really cool stuff about it. 100 mile per gallon MV.
It's just that idea of conversion planning that we started, I guess, back in the 80s, and I'm just wondering where any of that's going with
I think you're seeing commercial convergence happen. I think you're seeing a definite shift in the thinking in the Department of Defense from blowing things up to stability operations. If you read any of Gates's writings, every single speech he makes, everything he talks about has stability operations in them. He's convincing us that the mission of the military is to promote stability. Whether if we have to fight to do it, we'll do that, but that's a last resort, right? Presence, deterrence, nation-state building, nation building, it's not nation-state building, humanitarian operations, those are all within the sphere of the Department of Defense, and they're all in the area that you're talking about. So yeah, absolutely that shift is taking place. And it's good. I mean, it's a much smarter military than when I was active duty. Yes, sir.
Do you think, to her point, do you think whether it's the X Foundation and the things that are going on there around kind of crossing high technology innovation with more world kind of issues, or the things going on with a SpaceX type corporation in between the shuttle and the Constellation, that some of those things will start to feed in and start to close the cultural gap that's going on right now on the DoD side?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little frustrated about the cultural gap, frankly. And I've been banging my head against that wall for a while. I'm almost, and I'm not usually like this, I'm almost at the stage of saying we got to wait for some of these guys to do it. There's only so many tricks old dogs can learn. Yes, sir. And the good news is it's a revolving door at the senior levels. I mean, those guys don't stay in the chairs very long. So,
I understand the implications of security, stability,
yeah,
those things that I'm pointing out. But is there, so given that, are there any chances of being possibly beta testing, piloting an open system as you suggested, or anything else? Maybe by decentralizing one of the DoD functions.
Yeah, so go on the web, put Glenn Colby and open systems in, and you'll see several talks that I'm contracted to him for exactly what you're talking about, a beta environment for open systems. We are now being looked at very heavily for co-funding by OpNav, which does requirements and funding for the entire Navy, for naval aviation. So we think next year will be an open systems pilot for warfighting aviation platforms for the Navy. So it's not all done yet, but I think there's promise there. And we're not the only ones. There are several Air Force efforts that are going on. CANE's going on there, and we've been working with PEOIWS, which is Integrated Warfare Systems, and they're hard how to transition CANE's into this. They got the same problem with aviation. Air Force has the same problem we do. Army's got the same problem. We're all nibbling around the edge. I think it's a matter of time. But business model is a huge problem too. Yes, sir.
Yes, an open system more vulnerable to hacking.
No, absolutely not. Do you disagree with me?
No.
Okay. So a lot of people in the Department of Defense don't believe that. They think open means it's open to the world. Open doesn't mean open to the world. It's not how you operate it. You don't operate it openly. You design it openly. Open means your interfaces are published. Right? So you can use very powerful information assurance techniques on open systems. And in fact, there's a lot of thought behind the fact that proprietary systems are more vulnerable because they stay static longer. So once you understand a proprietary system and you beat it, it takes a lot longer to recover from that. There's a tremendous amount of work that's gone on around security in open systems. And we move trillions of dollars in the banking industry on open systems fairly securely. And I guarantee you there are a lot more hackers interested in getting that money than are getting our secrets on the battlefield. So can we design very secure open systems for battlefield operations? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit interested here to say, so the danger room, when the early bird releases here, comes out August 3rd. Marine fan put it on Facebook.
I actually have that right here. It's on my machine. Yeah, I was going to put it up.
And the comment
I was just going,
it's interesting because the explanation
security
of the Force Order actually says the very nature of SNS, social network sites, creates a larger attack and exploitation window, exposes unnecessary information to adversaries, and provides an easy conduit for information leakage that puts OPSEC, COMSEC, communication security, and personnel at elevated risk of compromise. To shut down. What's your response to that?
Because we're taping this, I probably should not respond to that. But I believe that there are techniques that we can use that would mitigate those risks. Now, one of the things you have to ask yourself is what part of the system would you want your forces to be able to use social networking? I'm not sure it's in the part where the Marines are taking the gun. Right? So thinking that our systems have to be operated open, which was the gentleman's question up in the corner, in such a way that the Marine in the field in his tactical system would have access to Twitter, I think that'd be kind of dumb, right? But what if you said, gee, Twitter technology might work well for moving small snippets of information between the Marines and a closed system? Which you might. Now, who's going to break into our system if it's only the Marines using it on the battlefield? Right? So it's now not an operated open system. It's a designed open system operated closed. Those are very secure. So, I think a fair amount of you are familiar with some of the knowledge management battlefield technologies that we're using right now are based on Jabber or chat. It's open commercial technology operated in a closed system. It's not insecure at all. So this is where, at the senior levels, a lot of these guys don't understand the engineering. Now, I don't know if that's the case in this case. I don't know what application he's talking about. But my experience is that a lot of our senior leaders don't understand the engineering behind it. And they ask questions like, I can't do open systems because it makes us insecure. And they're thinking that we're advocating exposing our tactical systems to the internet. We're not. We're advocating using those technologies in a closed system on the battlefield. because those technologies are very effective at being able to move information around, move knowledge around. Designing proprietary knowledge systems is expensive, hard, difficult, not going to happen for the small market we're talking about. So a lot of the underlying software techniques we believe are going to have to be open systems techniques. But we sure as heck shouldn't open those up so that some hacker in Russia can actually get into our network. You got to understand the system environment. Yes, ma'am.
I looked this up earlier. A quote from Linus Torvalds: "With enough eyeballs, all blood are shallow."
Oh, with what?
With enough eyeballs, all blood are shallow.
Yeah. Linus is a pretty interesting guy. You guys know who Linus is. So one of the champions of open source and Linux. So if you ever get the opportunity to have time to talk to Linus, take it. Brilliant. We done? Thank you very much. Oh.
Yeah, it's, coming from IT myself, it's kind of surprising to hear some of the challenges that
What?
Some of the challenges that
Why are they surprising?
Why are they surprising?
I mean, do you see different challenges? Because I got to tell you, I see them in every organization I touch.
Right, but you know, we've looked into at defense for some of the most revolutionary systems like the internet, and we always kind of think that they would be ahead of the curve. So, you know, especially with the amount of government expenditure that goes towards the defense department, do you think part of the problem might be the allocation of those funds?
Oh, yeah. So you're saying, gee, you thought the Department of Defense budget was so big that, well, why wouldn't we be ahead of the curve? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. I would echo that completely. Like, you guys have all the cash and you probably have some money.
Yeah.
Why would you do this?
We are at least 15 years behind the commercial world in our technology development for knowledge systems.
And the Department of Defense is underfunded by what, Rick? About 15% compared to what their requirements are?
Well, the other thing that's interesting is a lot of the perceptions like you're voicing come from the days when DARPA was the dominant technology investment arm for IT in the world, right? In the 1980s. And so the ARPANET, which was ARPA before DARPA, that money was invested there, and it was invested there because nobody in the commercial world could actually understand what networks were going to do for them. I mean, it was all mainframe-based sequestered systems, looked a lot like our tactical systems today, right? The 1990s changed that. So now where DARPA, I think, I'm not sure of these figures, I think DARPA may have represented something like 10 to 20% of tech investment back in the 70s era and early 80s. I think it's some small fraction of 1% now. I mean, a very small fraction of 1%. So, and the market for the Department of Defense's applications, if looked at the wrong way, is so tiny that the model is that we have to pay for development. In the commercial world, nobody pays for development, they pay for a working product. Companies develop at risk. It's a flipped model for the Department of Defense. Because it's gone down a proprietary route, proprietary extensions, we have to pay for development. That causes the use for funds to be very, very inefficient. So imagine if you had to buy Microsoft Office and your company, and to buy it, you had to pay Microsoft to develop it. How much it would cost. That's what we're looking at. That's why our software is, a software application on one of our airplanes, the price tag many times is something on the order of $100 million for an application. I dare say you would, in a company, pay $100 million for a software application. Right? So the economics, because of the business model, are completely flipped. The proprietary nature of the way that we build is costing us so much money that it's causing us to be behind. But there are arguments that say that that's where it ought to be now.
Do you have an example of a company that has bridged the gap between the military or the defense side as well as the commercial side?
Yeah, Cisco. We had Cisco routers everywhere. Great example. And Cisco won't build a proprietary product for us, and the market's not big enough. Cisco makes the best routers in the world. Well, that get me in trouble. Cisco makes good routers. Some of this. We buy one hell of a lot of Cisco routers. And we put them, we actually even put them in things like Wi-Fi airplanes. So they bridge it down. Thank you very much.